Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of SuperFantaFi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Season 1, Episode 3. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So immediately open with Percy going to visit the Oracle, which I love that the Oracle doesn't really talk to you directly. She summons up like this cloud of green gas or whatever, and it takes on the form of, I guess it has to be the form of someone you know, I guess, to make the information and the prophecy that much more digestible. It's just interesting. Out of anyone, you could take on the form of, why specifically Percy's mom's boyfriend? Like, I don't know why, especially because Percy doesn't like to do. Maybe that actually comes into play. Maybe it's specifically someone you don't like it manifests itself as, because it's like, out of anyone in your life it had to manifest that way. Maybe it's because it probably specifically has to be a human in your life, maybe. But yeah, told him of the prophecy of what he's got to do. And I love how they intercut that with, okay, first up, it's like, well, choose the people on your quest. He ends up choosing Annabeth, and I love Chiron being like, well, typically people wait till they hear at least a few of the names before they choose. But it's like, yes, Annabeth is the type of person who will push me down some stairs or push me off of something if it means completing a quest. And this quest is going to be tough, so you're going to need someone who's willing to do whatever it takes to kind of get it done. And the other person he ends up choosing is Grover. Obviously, I'm not surprised, even without the trailers. Once again, I've seen the movie. Once again, I know that's not a full not a 100% accurate representation of the story, but still, I don't feel like I remember it being such a, I mean, once again, maybe it's something like the movie like quickly went through, but it being a whole ordeal, like who you choose. So, because like Percy and Grover being in a kind of awkward position they are in, I don't remember that being as much of a thing in the movie. But like I said, it's been a long time, so I could be misremembering. I don't. Once again, it's also a movie. It's condensed, so it could have also been like not covering that beat of like, things are a little awkward between them and everything. Because Grover was basically put on punishment, like basically horse dung, like shoveling, because of, he was told not to tell Percy about his mom, but he did, because he's the only person that was going to be 100% honest with Percy, because Percy wasn't going to do this quest otherwise. So it's like, you should be thanking Grover because you gave him other reasons, but it's like, right, you want Percy to rise to the occasion because like, oh, this is a quest you need to do for your father, yada yada, so on and so forth. But if he has opposition of like, hey, I have something else I'm trying to accomplish in this, and this might take precedent over reclaiming the Master Bolt, that being like saving his mom, I could see it being a little bit of the journey could be a division of focus and a conflict of interest in some capacities. But as he's choosing Grover, I love that it cuts back, that it's like, hey, you will be betrayed by someone that you call friend, or someone that calls you friend, and you will fail. So that's the prophecy. But immediately I'm like, well, even without the context of, once again, someone had commented last episode that the books are, I think they kind of approach the movies are approached very much like the show Preacher, where it's like, it's the broad strokes about what the story is, but they kind of do their own thing with it. I think kind of a similar thing. They were just someone that specifically used the phrasing that the movies were kind of their own thing, and once again, the show is going to be a more accurate adaptation of the books. But even without the context of even having seen the movies, like, I think it's interesting because it's like, well, that's the complicated thing about prophecies. They're super vague and they're always up to interpretation, and it's never quite as obvious as you think they are. But what I know of the story, I feel like I can tell. That has to be associated with what I think the story beat is. Once again, if this story beat, once again, no spoilers, so I'm not going to talk about it, but if the story beat doesn't play out the same way, I'd assume it's going to be the same as it was in the movie. But once again, the movie kind of did its own thing, so maybe that's a story beat from the book, or maybe not. We'll see how that plays out when the time comes, whether or not that prophecy manifests itself in the way that I think it will. So, but that is kind of sad, because initially you're thinking like, right, so why is Percy bringing him along? Does he? At first I was like, is he bringing Grover along just to keep an eye on him? But he gives an explanation later on, which is actually really heartbreaking. That he's like, right, I chose you two, yes, Annabeth, yes, because of her skill, but also like, right, she's the one person I could never see myself becoming friends with, so I knew I wouldn't have to worry about her betraying me. And you, I figured you're my best friend, you'd always pick my side no matter what, which obviously leads to like conflict as the episode progresses, but we'll get to that soon enough. And it's kind of sad that was kind of his perspective, and it is kind of heartbreaking to realize, like, oh, it's not me being the best of the best at the campus that I was chosen. It's just because we butt heads so much that you literally can't even see us ever becoming friends, which is kind of sad. But that's the only reason why you chose me. And Grover, it's like you only chose me because you figured I would always have your back. So that's actually really kind of sad and complicated. Like I said, that's why I think it's so interesting that they decided to reveal that to us, the audience, at the moment he chose to bring Grover along. It's like, yeah, you're my friend, so I need to bring people I can trust. And it's like, but like there isn't. Because the whole thing is built off of the premise of distrust. It's like, I'm bringing you along because you're going to have my back. I know you will, or at least I believe you will. So it's very manipulative in a lot of capacities because neither one of them knew what was up. But obviously, you don't want it to be one of those self-fulfilling prophecies of like, in a sense of trying to make it not happen, you ultimately end up making it end up happening, self-fulfilling in that capacity. But either way, Luke ends up giving Percy the Hermes shoes, which is a pretty dope gift. It's like, right, I would have brought you two, but I knew that if I was bringing Annabeth, I couldn't bring you two because you even made it clear that if anything happened, you would always choose Annabeth over anything. So, but Luke's like, no, I totally get it. Just you guys look out for each other on this quest. Then there's also Annabeth stopping by the tree because it turns out that's what Thalia is, because they were being pursued by monsters, specifically the same ones that came after Percy, the Furies, and in an attempt to, Thalia wanted to hold them off so that she could protect her friends, but in the process, like, before things got dire, Zeus, in his own way of trying to protect her, turned her into a tree, which even Percy kind of calls out the BS behind it. It's like, her dad couldn't step in any other capacity. He had to, like, turn her into a tree, which I said Athena, jeez. Annabeth looks at it as like a great honor because it's basically that mythology thing of I mean, this is more so from a Norse perspective. I'm sure there was like a Greek version of it too, but like the equivalency, well, because like, Olympus isn't Valhalla's like the afterlife, but that isn't where the gods are in Norse mythology. But that's supposed to be like where warriors go when they die. It's like, is Olympus supposed to be where does Greek mythology have their own version of Valhalla? Because I don't think Olympus is supposed to be that. That's where the gods are, but I don't think it's supposed to be the Greek equivalency to Valhalla. I think those aren't equatable. So I don't think I've ever really. I guess it's just the afterlife. Maybe there is no like direct parallel to Valhalla, but either way, it's kind of like, oh, having a warrior's death and dying like a warrior is a grand thing. Her, like, she got a fitting warrior's ending, and of course Annabeth is going to have that belief because, I mean, I think a lot of the kids in general like believe in the gods because it's like, right, they have like a lot more faith, because I think maybe it's a byproduct of, I mean, because we don't know how long it was before a lot of these other people found out who they were, these kids. Percy went a good chunk of his life, I mean, he's like, 12 now? He's gone all that time never knowing the truth about him being a demigod. Who knows when the others found out? So their faith is going to be a little more there in comparison to Percy, who just grew up a normal kid. So he definitely has a very negative perspective on the gods, which is something I talked about previously too. I was curious how this series would handle the gods, and it's like, yeah, it's just like I thought. Most things depict the gods as complete and utter douchebags, and this series doesn't disappoint because it leans into no, they are douchebag. But yeah, you have Annabeth. Well, before I go on, back to the Thalia of it, I'm curious because the gods aren't meant to interfere, so maybe that's the most indirect way that Zeus could interfere by saving his daughter. But it's still kind of like, probably could have found a better indirect way of helping. But maybe, I don't know. Like, it can be, depends on perspective, because it can be seen as a callous way of handling things of like, oh, you just did like the bare minimum, or you are just bound by these rules and you did the most that you could within those frames. But it's also like, yeah, but what parent wouldn't go above and beyond for their child? And that's where you kind of get into the rub of it all. Once again, it's easy to have the very anti-God perspective when all you hear is stories about him. And like God of War, like, the God of War, more recent ones are a great example of that, where it's just like, yeah, you hear these stories about how terrible Odin and Thor are. It's kind of like, yeah, you definitely aren't going to have like the best perspective when you actually do eventually meet them. You know, it's that type of conversation. But either way, Annabeth has decided to take charge, which Percy's like, what, does she think she's in charge? It's like, yeah, she looks at herself as more leadership material, and you're the flunkies that ended up following, even though this is Percy's quest. He's like, yeah, I thought we'd, like, should have a show of hands to kind of dictate that stuff. He thought this was a democracy, kind of more of a dictatorship in a sense. So, but they're supposed to go to LA because LA, the doorway to the underworld is under LA, which I'm like, they didn't comment on it, but I'm like, is that supposed to like insinuate something? So I mean, what isn't it? Because LA is supposed to be like specifically the city, isn't, well, city of angels, but also like, doesn't it also borderline as like the city of sin too, or something like that? It feels like there's something deeper there to some capacity, making it like, oh yeah, the portal to the underworld is underneath that specific city. So maybe they'll kind of lean into that and talk about that more when they get closer, maybe. I also love that we get Grover having to play this mediator role, which I understand. Like, he's the, hey, I don't want conflict type of person. Like, I get that because I'm very much like Grover. I feel like in a lot of capacities, when it comes to my own family, I feel like I played the mediator role. That role has kind of been thrust upon me. Other times I've just been forced to play that role. But also it's just like, I'm not big into conflict. I'm very passive. I don't want conflict. I don't want any like disagreement. So like him doing everything he can, like I'm like I give off Grover energy. So I'm like, dude, I've never felt so close to the character Grover in this moment than just like, yeah, there's so much of like personalities that overlap in that regard. We also learn more about how the monsters actually hunt demigods. Obviously, they go after any demigods, but the big three, Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon, their offspring are like higher on the board, but it's still like, any demigod could end up getting it from the monsters, but it's more so the big trio that end up drawing the biggest attention. But it's like, it's not just fear, it's something in you that kind of makes them find you, and they find the cracks in your armor, whether it's like the things about your insecurities or the things you feel worst about yourself. They use that, they smell that, and they exploit that against you. As we see, the Furies are closing in. Ecto, who is, now that I got an even closer look at her, I didn't correlate it because I didn't see her name until the end credits, but now having associated being like, oh dang, that's Megan Mullally, like looking at her up close, and I'm like, yeah, that's definitely her. But yeah, she tried to strike a deal with Annabeth. It's like, hey, I can help you, just hand over the kid, you could go on your quest on your merry way and we won't interfere. I was just given orders to bring the kid to the underworld. It's like, yeah, we're going there anyway, but it's like, we got to go there on our own, and it's like, I could help you. Like, obviously, you want to impress that mother of yours and everything, so how, like, you prove your worth, so. But Annabeth decided not to cooperate, because it's also like, right, I'm not going to cooperate with a monster. That wouldn't be very heroic of me, so. So they end up escaping from, well, because it was Ecto and her sister is on the bus too, coming after them, and so Annabeth like throws her sword at her, and they all three of them bail. They get away from the siblings, because this is only two we've interacted with. There's three, which is also interesting too to know, like, there is no like permadeath for them, because I guess when they die they just go back to the underworld, or just maybe monsters in general have that constitution, so it makes you go like, oh, so the Minotaur's not dead, it's just probably going to take a hot minute to like pop back up, or maybe he just, the moment they die they go to the underworld till they can be like brought back up. It's probably like a whole journey to leave the underworld to come back to the earth realm and everything. So But our trio is sadly, it's more Annabeth and Percy that are at each other's throats, but the problem is, like, Grover's not really helping the situation because he's trying to be the peacekeeper and try to mediate things, but as he kind of talks about later on, there's a situation where you just can't, like, play the role of mediator. It's just, sometimes, like, assertiveness is needed, so. But they're on this satyr path. He talks about his Uncle Ferdinand taking one on a quest and stuff, and they ultimately find their way to, like, was it Madame M's garden or something like that, and it's like, oh, M, all these stone statues, who could she be? And lo and behold, it's Medusa. To the point that, one of the Furies refused to actually come too close because it's like, right, come inside, like, you don't have to worry, like, as long as I'm here, she won't come after you. And I was wondering the entire time, I'm like, who's playing Medusa? I actually don't even remember who played her in the movie off the top of my head. I'd actually have to look it up, but I was like, who is that? It's not till later on in the episode when she finally took off the hat, and it was the faraway shot, I was like, wait, is that who I think it is? And I'm listening to her voice, I'm like, wait, I was like, is that? And yes, it's Jessica Parker Kennedy. The thing I best know her for is, have you ever seen the Flash TV show? The one that was on the CW? Spoilers. She played Barry Allen, aka the Flash. She played his daughter Nora. What was Nora's moniker? Her superhero moniker? Was it? I want to say it was Excessive. I don't think it was Exceed. I think it was Excessive, but I could be mistaken. I want to say it was Excessive. But yeah, I was like, oh, dude, because I kept thinking to myself, I'm like, that looks and kind of sounds like her, but yeah, it totally is Jessica Parker Kennedy. And I was like, oh, that's dope. But I mean, obviously, we get the, like, I mean, I think, but once again, I'm not well versed in Greek mythology. Like I said, I know, like, probably like the most monochrome amount above average knowledge when it comes to Greek mythology. I'm not, but I'm like, I never know, like, I don't know a lot of Medusa's story. I know Medusa when she pops up, you know? Because obviously, you know, you go with God of War, Medusa isn't the only Gorgon. She's like top class Gorgon. She's a very specific one. But they don't really go into this. They just make it seem like Medusa's the only one. They're like, there are no Gorgon species as a whole, but it's just her, and you know, her situation being a punishment. But because I remember there was some, I want to say it was I think the TV show Blood Ties dealt with a Medusa, if I remember correctly. I could be mistaken. I feel like, yeah. They dealt with a Medusa, and in that one she had a tragic story too. I think she probably traditionally does. I mean, a lot of mythology is riddled with tragedy, especially when it comes to people getting screwed over by the gods. But Percy had a feeling like, right, she's not a monster, because going back to that line from his mom in the flashback in the first episode, not everyone that's good is actually good, and not everyone that's a monster is necessarily. It's up to you to kind of determine labels are just labels put on by other people. It's up to you to determine how the real nature of a person. So he wanted to follow his mom's he trusted his mom in that moment, so they go inside and they sit down. And I love it's like, do we trust this food? And Grover's like, I'm gonna be honest with you, Percy, I'm so hungry right now, I'm willing to take that risk. But obviously, Medusa and Athena have beef, and because of that, Annabeth felt like me being here is a little different from you two being here. And we find out the tragedy behind it. That it's like, and because at first I was about to say, is Medusa one of Athena's kids or something? But it's like, no. It's just, she was a worshiper. It's like, no, I get it. You worship her, you're loyal to her, you love her. I wasn't just like you, Annabeth. I was you. I prayed and believed. I gave everything to the gods and worshiping Athena, but I didn't even get a single omen being like, oh, good job. Your prayers and your worship has been received and yada, yada, yada. But then, like, she was approached by a different god, Poseidon, and she found him so amazing and she started worshiping him, and Athena called her out for it, and I forgot what her crime was specifically, but it's like, because I stopped worshiping Athena, it's like, you're supposed to worship me even with no response. It's supposed to be based on faith, and your faith in me disappeared, so I gotta punish you for it. She tried to make it seem like it was something else, but Annabeth was like, no. My mom is just. There's no way she would do that. Like, it's like, you're lying. But it's like, yeah. Annabeth, and a lot of people have unwavering, I think Annabeth in particular has unwavering belief in the gods, because it's like, if you doubt the gods, what does that mean about you as their child? But also, having doubts about the gods just means like, hey, like, I don't want to turn my back on the gods. I want to be praised by them, because that's the only way I can kind of show my true value, is by being valuable in their eyes. But it is sad. And even Medusa's like, right, I kind of care about you a little, Percy, because you and your mom we're kind of like sisters. Like, it seems like she was in love with Poseidon, but I guess maybe that's a little indicative of Poseidon. It's like, because that was also the thing for her, and that is a sad situation in a cheating situation. It is always like, your partner who cheats should be the one that catches all the flack. Not all, I think it does happen, but I feel like more often than not, it's the person they're cheating with that catches all the flack. You know, it's like, it takes two to tango, sure, but the person who should get all the wrath and all the mire should be, you know, the person who actually did the cheating, your partner. And it's kind of that, where it's like, rather than Poseidon getting all the hate, but maybe because Athena wouldn't dare step to Poseidon, because it's one of the big three. So maybe that's what that is, and it's easier to punish a faulty human, because humans are so faulty and lesser than, because even Medusa said it himself, was like, they could never be unjust in their eyes. In their eyes, the gods see themselves as unfallible, that they're always in the right, because they deem themselves so much bigger and larger and better than anything and everyone else. And it makes you wonder, does Poseidon feel any regrets? Or was just Medusa just kind of like, was it a game to him manipulating her? Did he actually care about her? Like, what that was? Because the way Medusa was talking about it almost made it sound like Percy's mom and her were kind of like sister wives almost, to an extent. But it's like, right, can you really trust Grover and Annabeth to have your back when it comes to saving your mom? Because is your mom safe right now? It's like, no, but with my help, I can remove them from the equation, and you don't have to worry about it. But by the time she turns back around, Percy's already gone. It's like, right, they're working together as a team to stop her. So I don't think it went down as smoothly in the movie when it came to taking her down. I don't know if it's this. I mean, that's always the way to beat her traditionally, is you make her see her own reflection. I think it depends on the continuity, because I feel like some stuff makes it so that she's immune to her own petrification. But I feel like more often than not, that is how maybe it's not most. Maybe it's just like a few. But I feel like most times Medusa's ever taken down in stories I've seen, it's always been like, right, you use her own reflection against her to turn her to stone. Because I might be thinking of, like, was it Wrath of the Titans or Clash of the Titans? Like that Norse mythology, not Norse, it was Greek mythology movie. Because didn't he end up going up against a Gorgon? Didn't Odysseus go up against one in the Odyssey? God, I have not covered the Odyssey since, like, high school, so I don't remember it that well. Because I know he came across sirens and Gorgons. I mean, more specifically Medusa, but I'm like, I know she's been beaten that way before, but I feel like other times the typical thing is just to cut off her head. That way you get to utilize it. I mean, Kratos did that, because that's one of your abilities in the first God of War, isn't it? Being able to pull out her head to petrify enemies. So, can't go wrong with a classic. I mean, but I feel like those are the two number one ways. Either just chopping off her head given the opportunity, or you just end up like turning her to stone or something. But yeah, luckily Grover came in clutch, flying in by accident with the Hermes shoes, distracting her long enough, then having Annabeth put the hat on her. That's so interesting. Two things. One, knowing like, oh, that's how you prevent it. Like, I mean, you can't actually see her eyes. So it's interesting to know that invisibility trunks the magical curse. Because, to be fair, you can't see her eyes. Which, that's always the thing, too. Like, is it specifically the snake hair? Like, the snake eyes on her hair? Or is it just her face in general? Or is it might be, because her actual eyes are like a bluish color. So, maybe it's her actual eyes. You don't even just, the snakes are responsible for petrifying you. But maybe it's like, I don't know which set of eyes it's the one that specifically petrifies you. Looking at her eyes or the snake eyes, maybe it's all the same. But either way, but it's just, like I said, it's just interesting to know, like, the invisibility trunks that curse. Because it's like, right, you can't actually make eye contact now that she's invisible, which I thought was kind of interesting. But yeah, Percy swung for the fences and sliced her head off. What's also interesting, too, about the invisibility, knowing that it doesn't just apply to the head, it applies to the entire body. The rest of her body stays. I mean, also because, like, we are talking about, like, if this was probably PG-13, they'd probably show off the body, like you wouldn't see blood or anything, but maybe you see an angle being like, oh, there's the body, there's the head. But because I don't know what the ratings for this is, I don't know if it's like Y7 or something, or like PG. I don't know what the rating for the show is. I'm sure it'd kind of be in that territory. Probably more like PG. Maybe TV, it might even be TV-14. Maybe I'm underestimating. But either way, like, the fact is this could be their way to get around that by being like, oh yeah, and the body stayed invisible. But it just feels interesting to know, like, even when even though the head is separate from the body, because it was connected to the body when it was turned invisible, it stays maybe invisible forever. Only the head becomes uninvisible. Visible. I don't know why I said uninvisible. Jesus, becomes visible. Maybe that's how that works. And even the body's forever stuck being invisible. But ultimately, our trio, like in the aftermath of all this, kind of, it all comes to a head. Like stuff they've kind of been keeping buried the entire time. Annabeth had called Percy out for being scared of something, and then it's also like, well, what deal did you make with one of the Furies? Annabeth, oh, what did you talk to Medusa about? And then, like, you had Grover, like, finally speak up, and it's like, all right, like, Percy, like, can't you, like, because he kept being like, why don't you contact Athena? It's like, oh, you can't, can you? And it's like, well, she can't, because the only thing she has from her mom is that cap. It's the only, so it's very important to her. But it's also like, Annabeth, do you think about how conflicted he is? Yes, he's got to go on this quest, a quest he didn't really ask to go on, that was kind of forced upon him. But also, like, knowing that his mom is still alive, the person that raised him, like, he has no like affiliation with Poseidon, because Poseidon was an absentee father. A lot of these gods are absentee fathers and mothers. But then also you add in that you find out not only is she alive, but she's being held prisoner in the underworld, because this is Annabeth's first time hearing about this as well. So it's like, it all stemmed from Percy not being able to, I mean, it was Annabeth feeling like things were on a need-to-know basis, one, but also Percy keeping a lot of stuff to himself because he didn't know who to trust, because he finally told Annabeth and Grover the truth about everything, about, like, being the Oracle saying, like, hey, you're going to be betrayed. And Grover's like, we have to stick together, like, because if we don't find our way forward together, we might as well go back to camp and give up, because we won't make it, going forward. Percy ultimately decides to mail, after getting rid of the Fury outside by turning her to stone, so there's no, like, coming back for her. That's the equivalency of death. I guess also in this world there is no undoing Medusa's, like, petrification. Like, it's not like her head can be used, like, oh, you point it to someone and you undo the petrification. It doesn't seem like it works that way. I feel like I vaguely remember there being a means of getting rid of the petrification. Thought it was maybe when they decapitated her that's how that happened, but I don't remember. It feels like a lot of times that's typically how that works. You have to decapitate, like, that kind of undoes the petrification, but maybe that's not the case. But yeah, Percy ends up mailing the head to Olympus, which can be seen from the gods as a slight, but Percy's like, yeah, I am kind of a little rambunctious and everything, but it could also be seen as tribute, because, hey, you did say your mom had beef with her, right? So your mom might see it as kind of a gift from her daughter and on this quest and stuff. But also, by sending it to the gods, because we can't just leave the head around for someone else to find it. But also, by sending it there, we don't have to worry about having a dangerous item in our hands or anyone else's. And you get to keep your mom's, the hat you got from your mom. So we do see Hermes ends up picking it up. And lo and behold, it's Lin-Manuel Miranda, which I thought was so interesting, because I saw that he was in the show. I just didn't know who he was playing. I think I brought this up last episode, because I know in the movie, I think he's only in the second movie, if I'm not mistaken, Nathan Fillion plays Hermes. But, yeah. So that's interesting. Just funny, too, considering, like, he's in this. He's also in his Dark Materials, the TV show. So it's, like, just interesting, these novel adaptations getting Lin-Manuel Miranda, like, in the mix. So I think it's kind of interesting. Hey, I'm very excited to ultimately see where the next episode ends up taking us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.